And then the following week, last week, we were talking about Lot. And we were talking about Sodom and Gomorrah. And we were talking about how Lot chose to go pinch his tits. Excuse me. Go pinch his tits. Excuse me. Pitch his tits. Pitch his tits is what I said. And you heard nothing else here. This is church, my gosh. So he was...
Shoot. Well, you know, some terrible things happen sometimes. You know, you wish you could live them down, but it doesn't happen. I heard about Ted Kennedy one time was giving a speech on C-SPAN about education, and in his speech he said our national interest, he said, ought to encourage the breast. And then he just kind of went on and said, the beast, the best and the brightest. So, you know, I mean, we all have those times when the words get mixed up, right? Y'all never had that happen, have you? Yeah, I didn't think so. I didn't think so, yeah. Well, I can tell you from nearly 30 years of personal experience that, you know what, words get mixed up sometimes and you say things that you really don't want to say, and there are slips of the tongue are just flat inevitable. I don't care where you're at or who you're talking to. Those kind of things are inevitable. So let me just welcome you to GraceLife.tv here today. We're just glad that you're with us here at the El Paso campus, and welcome as well to all of you who are joining us online all over the United States and around the world as well. We're beginning a series today called Look Out, It's Loaded. Of course, in this series what we're going to be talking about is we're going to be looking at what James has to say about that little appendage that's in our mouth. Most people know it as the tongue. And what that kind of gets us into trouble a lot of times. As a matter of fact, James tells us under no uncertain terms that really the tongue is the most dangerous weapon and the most powerful weapon in the world. It has the power, he says it has the power to influence the direction of our lives. It has the power to destroy, and it also has the power to bless and to curse. Well, I think you all know that, but we're going to kind of take a look at what James has to say about this particular subject. You know, many years ago I worked for the U.S. government, and I knew a guy up there in the mountains up in Wolf Canyon, he had a place back in there, a log cabin, and I'd stop by to see him once in a while, and actually he happened to be a cop, and he worked over in Hamos Springs area, and a sheriff. And of course, he was interested in guns like I've always been interested in guns. So every time I'd stop by there, he was pulling out the latest gun that he got, or we were talking about guns in one way or another, you know. And that seemed like it was always ended up being the topic of conversation one way or another, you know. And we'd sit there at the kitchen in that old log house, at the kitchen table in that old log house, and he'd be on one side and I'd be on the other. And you know, of course, being a cop, he carried a sidearm all the time on a job, and I assumed that he had been trained in carrying a firearm and those kind of things. But you know, he pulled out a pistol one time to show me, and it was kind of a short barrel snub-nosed pistol, and before that whole conversation was over, he had pointed it in my direction several times, and during that time when he had it pointed in my direction, I could see that the ends of the bullets down in the cylinder and down the barrel of that gun. It wasn't a very comfortable feeling, if you want to know the truth. You know, it was just really bad. I thought, you know, well, man, it wasn't, but the fact is, it wasn't the gun that scared me. It was the guy holding the gun that scared me, you know. So, I mean, you don't ever point a gun in anybody's direction for any reason, and you always got to, especially if it's loaded, you know, especially if it's loaded. Now, the reason I've told you that story is to tell you this, is that the very first and most cardinal rule about owning any kind of firearm, any kind of weapon, any kind of gun is to always assume it's loaded, right? Always assume it's, I don't care how carefully you unloaded it, I don't care how many times you know that you unloaded it, I don't care if you just unloaded it, took the magazine out of it, and the chamber is open. You still assume it is loaded. Never point it in anybody's direction unless you plan to absolutely or are forced to use it. That's just the most cardinal rule of owning a gun first of all and foremost. So, again, is it guns that kill people? No, it's people that kill people, right? It is. I mean, the gun itself is not dangerous at all. No, the gun is an inanimate object that really has no power of its own to do anything on its own. It's people who kill people, not guns. You know, I got an email a while back, and maybe some of you got it, about the laziest gun in the world. Anybody get that email? Yeah, some of you guys have got it. It's about a gun, and this guy said something about the fact that he had, you know, he put the gun in a chair, and he put the ammunition on the arm of the chair there, and set it in the front door, and opened the door, you know, all those kind of things, and left it there for 8 hours. And he said after that 8 hours, that gun didn't do anything. It didn't shoot, it didn't load itself, it didn't kill a single person, you know. And he just came up with a conclusion that has to be the laziest gun in the world, you know. Well, I think the point was well made myself, you know. It's not guns that kill people, it's people that kill people. So, and that's what makes the tongue so dangerous, is because it always has a person hooked up to it, you know. A tongue, see, there you go. A tongue always has a person hooked up to it. A gun doesn't always have a person hooked up to it, you know. And even if it does have a person hooked up to it, it's still safe as long as the person knows what they're doing with it and handles it correctly, right? But a tongue, on the other hand, is more dangerous than that, because it always has someone hooked up to it, you know. The owner of it is always hooked up to it. Matter of fact, James indicates in James chapter 3 that the tongue is the most dangerous weapon known to man. And not only because everybody has one, you know, which everybody does, but he says that no one is able to keep it from going off unexpectedly. No one is able to keep it from going off unexpectedly, and to always keep it from, you know, never harming anyone or ever getting out of control, you know. We all do it. It is a problem. So with the tongue being such a dangerous weapon, then it's easy to figure that James certainly ain't the only one in the Bible to talk about the tongue. I mean, that would stand to figure, right? If it's the most dangerous weapon in the world, then obviously there's got to be some other places in the Bible where the tongue is mentioned and saying, listen, this is true, you know, you got to be careful. As a matter of fact, there are several places in the Bible. Let me just give you a few examples of other places in the Bible that talk about the tongue and how dangerous it is. For example, the psalmist talks about the tongue as being like a sharp sword that can, you know, literally take a person's head off, you know, with a single swipe. Or he also says it's like a razor blade that can slice you wide open with the slightest touch. Anybody ever been cut with a razor blade? Yeah, it's not fun, is it? And a lot of times you don't even know it till it's too late, and you don't really feel it to begin with. It just all of a sudden happens, and you just barely touched it, and you get cut, right? Well, the psalmist says that's what the tongue is like, can be like. Or he says even like a poisonous snake that will reach out and inject you with its poison, you know, strike you dead, and you just right when you least expect it. Well, Jeremiah also compares the tongue to a deadly arrow. You know, as I thought about that, I was thinking, well, how is that a deadly arrow? Well, it's a deadly arrow in the fact that a deadly arrow comes out of nowhere. Anybody here a bow hunter or ever shot a bow? Okay, so you kind of know what that's like. I imagine when you was a kid, right? You probably shot it straight up in the air, and so you could dodge it when it comes down and see how close you get to yourself. Anybody ever done? No, maybe you weren't that stupid, but I can see a few of those. Yeah, you don't have to raise your hand. I understand. But you also learned as you did that it's silent. You know, unless you can see it, you don't know where it's going to hit. You don't know where it's at, and that's why he says that it's like a poisonous arrow, like a dangerous arrow, because it comes out of nowhere. You don't hear it, you don't see it. It's just gets you. It's just there, and all of a sudden you're bleeding, and you don't know why. You know, it's kind of a scary thing. The writer of Proverbs says it's like a baseball bat, you know, that somebody uses to put a knob on your skull or to break your knees, you know. So the tongue is a very dangerous weapon. So James unpacks this idea about the tongue being a dangerous weapon, being the world's most dangerous weapon, quite literally. And the first thing he has to say about it is found in the first 4 verses of James chapter 3 there. And he says it has the power to influence the very direction of our lives and the lives of others. It has a power to influence the direction that we take in our lives. So let me ask you a question. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Yes, you're right. Both. Yes. The answer is yes. It's both a good thing and it's a bad thing. Because it can be good and it can be bad. Maybe that's a better way to say that. You know, I've always liked that quote by Abraham Lincoln when he said, "Better to remain silent and thought to be a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt." Amen. However, I like Larry the Cable Guy's version a little better. He said, "Light travels faster than sound. That's why some people appear bright until you hear them speak." Yeah, I like that. But I think you realize that both of those guys, and anybody that has made a statement like that, has done nothing more than paraphrase what the Bible has already said in Proverbs chapter 17 and verse 28. You might want to look that up sometime. It says there, even a fool, when he keeps silent, is considered wise. When he closes his lips, he is considered prudent. You know? Even I paraphrase it this way. Even a fool is thought to be wise if he keeps his mouth shut. As a matter of fact, sometimes I have a hard time finding that verse in the Bible because that's the way I remember it. Even a fool is thought to be wise as long as he keeps his mouth shut. You know, you open your mouth and you can prove otherwise quite quickly. Okay, so then James says in verse 1, and you need to look at this, because this is interesting as well as maybe one of those verses that if you knew about it, it's been one of those on the back burner of your mind that's kind of scared you for a long, long time, like me and like some others I know that we've talked about this. It says, "Let not many of you become teachers, my brethren, knowing that as such," that being a teacher, "you will incur a stricter judgment." Is that scary? That kind of send a chill through your bones, won't it? That as a teacher, you will incur a stricter judgment. So who's he talking about here? Who is James talking about as being a teacher? Is that somebody who's paid to be a teacher? Is that only school teachers? Is that only, you know, pastors or preachers? Who is that? Well, I think it's anybody that stands in a public setting or in a classroom setting or any kind of a setting and presumes to teach others, right? Whether it's civil government, whether it's school, whether it's even your kids at home, you know. You teach them lots of stuff as well, you know. Even community, it doesn't matter, all those kind of things. So I don't think that there's any doubt, I don't think there's any doubt whatsoever, at least not in my mind, that on the positive side of that, a teacher is or should be a place of honor and dignity. However, because of the fact that it is also a place where you can profoundly influence the lives of others, of hundreds, maybe even thousands of people, that James says specifically that those who are in that position, in those kinds of positions, should be especially careful with what they say. Why? Because, he says, they will incur a stricter judgment. That's scary. That's a really scary thought, isn't it, on the surface? That's a really scary thing to think about. But let me ask you this question then. Now that you're sitting there kind of nervous and kind of scared if you don't know what this is all about, as a matter of fact, you know, a lot of people, I've talked to a lot of people that refuse to, maybe even lead a Bible study or to teach others something that they know, whatever, because of this very fact. So I need to ask you a really important question here, a pivotal question concerning this verse and what James has to say here. Who is doing the judging here? Or, if you prefer it the other way, where does the judgment come from? Actually, since this statement is found in the Bible, most of us, the majority of us, jump to the conclusion that God is the one who is doing the judging, right? I mean, that's an automatic. In our minds, that's an automatic. Well, James got to be talking about that God's going to judge you more strictly if you teach somebody the wrong thing. If you say something you shouldn't say, right? Matter of fact, one commentator I read, I'm going to sit down when I read this because he said, a teacher's condemnation is greater because, having professed to have a clear knowledge of duty, he is all the more bound to obey it. Whew. Wow. No thank you. No thank you. Now, if that were true, then the way to remain safe from judgment is to aspire to remain ignorant. Did I say that right? I think I did. The way to avoid judgment is to aspire to remain ignorant. Refuse to teach anyone anything. Because the fact is, if you think this through for a second, if you do it wrong, even if you think you're doing it right, God will judge you more severely. Yesterday afternoon, Big Jake was on. Did anybody see Big Jake? I just happened to catch just a few frames of that yesterday afternoon when I went in the house for a drink of water. And there's a place in there where it's a John Wayne movie, of course. John Wayne and can't remember the other guy's name. Anyway, they're in this confrontation. And he says, if you make one move, he said, if you do it wrong, I don't care if you're my fault, your fault, nobody's fault, you're dead. You know? Same thing here. If this is true, that God will judge us for saying the wrong thing, even if you think you're right? Because it's still wrong. I don't care how right you think you are. So in that sense of the word, then, if that's what James is talking about, is that God will judge you more severely, more strictly, if you teach the wrong thing. What that's really saying is, your fault, their fault, nobody's fault, doesn't matter. If you do it wrong, you will be judged more strictly. Period. Doesn't matter. You can think you're right all you want to, but if you do it wrong, you are going to incur stricter judgment. Right? So, is that what James says here? Let me ease your mind for a second. No. No, it is not. As a matter of fact, if James had meant God, he would have said God. Right? If he meant that God will judge you more strictly, he would have said, God will judge you more strictly. But he didn't say that. So who's he talking about then? Who's the only other person available? The audience. Those whom you speak to. You guys. Or if you're a teacher, the guys that you teach. Or people that you teach, right? Those whom we teach, the audience. Well, you know that already, right? And yet we look at these verses and it just puts a scare all the way through us because we think, oh, he's got to be talking about God. God is going to judge us more strictly, you know. It doesn't matter. Your fault, his fault, my fault, doesn't matter. If you're wrong, you will be judged more strictly. I don't care how right you think you are. You're dead. right? And I think you already know that. But, you know, that our audience, the people that we talk to, anything that you say can and will be used against you. And I'm talking about especially, and maybe specifically, by those who are seeking to destroy you anyway. If you're in a teaching position, you already know that. If you've ever taught anybody anything, you already know that. That those who don't like you to begin with, anything you say can and will be used against you. Anything you say can and will be twisted to make it sound like something you did not say. That's what James is talking about here. He said, get used to the idea that if you're going to be a teacher, get used to the idea that you will have your detractors. And they will twist and turn anything you say and use it against you at the most opportune moment for them. to take you down, to judge you more severely than if you had said nothing at all. Well, of course, you open your mouth, say something wrong, even if that's not what you meant to say. Pinch his tits. You know? How do you live that down? I don't know. Wow. Okay, so look at what he says then in verse 2. He says, and this is important, it goes along with verse 1. He says, for we, how many? All. Not just teachers. Not just those who teach others. We all stumble in many ways. And if, how many? Anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, perfect person, able to bridle the whole body as well. So who is able to bridle the whole body? No one. We all stumble in a lot of ways. We all say things that we don't mean. We all have stuff that comes out of our mouth that we didn't mean to say. It just, words get mixed up. That's just the way it is, you know. Actually, as a matter of fact, according to a recent study, for every 1,000 words that a person says that you say, you will make 1 or 2 errors statistically. And since then, the average pace of speech is about 150 words per minute, that means that we all have slips of the tongue once every 7 minutes of continuous talk. I think mine is a lot higher than that. I think mine's, you can already tell that, mine's much higher than that. So that comes to somewhere between 7 and 22 verbal slips every day. For people like me, it becomes somewhere between 50 and 150 slips per day. Just the way it is, you know. And I'm sure that most of the time, and I think you can see this in your own life, that most of the time, if those statistics are true, then most of the time we don't even know that we've said something wrong, right? How many times do you think you said something wrong yesterday, if you think back over it? I can't remember saying anything wrong. I think I did real good. Well, statistically, you did not, meaning that you didn't even know when you said something wrong, out of place, a wrong word in the sentence, or said the word wrong, or all kinds of a million bazillion things that you could do, you know? So all of us are in that position. And it's not God who judges us more severely. It's those who are around us, whether you're a teacher or whether you're just talking with your buddies. Doesn't make any difference, you know? As a matter of fact, you already know that you stand around and talk with your buddies, you say something wrong, you're going to catch it. You know, they're not going to let you live that down. They're going to rib you about that right then. I'd rather be ribbed about it right then than to be, you know, taken to court over it later, you know, or have somebody try to crucify you for it. All those different kind of things that happen. Guarantee you. I know. Been there, done that. Okay, so what's really interesting, at least in my opinion, about these first 4 verses in James is that the word pictures that he uses to describe this whole situation, this whole thing. The fact is, James specifically chooses those particular word pictures that specifically illustrate how small things control or have a profound effect on big things. How small things have the ability to control or have a profound effect on big things. So let's take a look at it. The first comparison, verse 3, he talks about a half-pound bit that goes into a horse's mouth, doesn't matter how big the horse is, and can control the posture, the direction, the attitude, of a 2,000-pound horse. I went with my daughter here last week, I believe it was. If you don't know, she's a large animal vet. I went with her we were going to do float some teeth up there at Winston. That means grinding the teeth down on a horse, if you don't know what that means. And there was a mule there. Oh man, he was a pretty mule. Oh wow, he was beautiful. Guy told me that he sold at Bishop Mule Days some years back for $10,000 for a mule. Stood about probably 16.2 at the withers. Big mule, beautiful mule, and had the sweetest disposition that you could imagine. He was an awesome mule. Just easy going, ears about this long. I love long ears. I don't know about you, but I love long ears. He was a beautiful mule. But you know what? As big as he was and as a powerful animal as he was, and he was stout. He was a big mule. He wasn't one of them skinny ones. He was like a draft mule. Beautiful thing. But you know what? You put a bit in his mouth, you can ride him anywhere you want to go. He was well trained. Control the direction that he goes, all those different kind of things. Amazing. That's what James is saying here. I haven't told you this story in a long time, so I'm gonna tell you again. Some years back, I had one of those near-death experiences on a horse. Really changed my life forever. It was one of those bad things, I was riding horseback, and everything was going fine until the horse started to jump and to bounce and those kind of things. And I tried to get everything together, but I kind of slipped over and was starting hanging on the side, and actually had my foot hung in the stirrup on one side, and the horse's hooves were going by my head, and all those. It was about the time I was just ready to lose consciousness. The Walmart manager came out and unplugged that thing and everything. Thank God for heroes. That's what I'm saying. Thank God for heroes. But the fact is, it really doesn't matter how small or how big the horse is. That small bit in its mouth is what controls the animal direction and the attitude of that animal. So James says, even though the tongue is a very small appendage as far as our bodies are concerned, it has the power to influence the direction and the attitude of those around you. In his second illustration, an even bigger illustration, he says it's like a ship, like a huge ship, and that this small rudder on the back of that ship controls that huge ship. That still amazes me. I'm thinking, how in the world can such a small rudder, affect such a large ship? And I saw a large ship one time, and I was a kid at the time, and so it was, was up close. It was just like a building, or a huge building. And so, you get a little perspective. I'm a landlubber, been a landlubber all my life, never been around these big things. But, you get a perspective like that, and it's like, wow. You would think that there'd have to be a rudder on the back at least as tall as the ship, to control it. But no, you don't. Through all that bad weather and high waves and everything else, those huge cruise ships that hold thousands and thousands of people is controlled by that little rudder on the back through the huge waves and all strong winds and all those different kind of things. So what James is telling us here is that the very direction of our lives and those around us is controlled by that little appendage in our mouth that we call the tongue, that thing that we lip our licks with. You know? So the words that we speak very definitely have a profound effect on those around us. Of course, we can encourage others, and that's really what we ought to be doing, is encouraging others through the words that we speak, you know. And probably if it weren't for that single word of encouragement that you got sometime in your life, you might not be where you're at today. You know, whoever it was that gave you that word of encouragement that said, I believe in you, you know, you can do this. We wouldn't have done it. We'd have never even known, maybe, that we could do whatever that was. On the negative side, a lot of us, most of us, probably all of us, still carry around with us those negative words that someone spoke into our lives as a young person, you know? And poorly chosen words are a horrible, horrible thing, you know? If you can't read that, it says stupidity. Now, I know you can read that part. It says the ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Yeah. The ability to speak does not make you intelligent. Well-chosen words can motivate, can offer hope, can create vision, can impact the thinking of others, and alter the results of others in our own lives in a very positive way. So what I want to do, the very last thing I want to do here today, is to leave with you what God says about you specifically. I want to leave with you what God says, not what I say, not what others think about you, but what God says, because He knows you better than anybody else. What God says about you specifically. He says, I know the plans that I have for you. Who is you? Me. You didn't know that? Yeah, and you. And you, and you, and you, and you, and you. God says, I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord. It's not guessing. He's saying this is the way it is. These are the plans that I have for you. Plans for your welfare. No, that's not a welfare check. That's to bless you, you know, to make things good come into your life. And not for your calamity. That's not Calamity Jane either. To give you a future and an awesome expectancy. An awesome to give you those things. That's my plan for your life. It's not for bad things to happen, but my plan for your life is for good things to happen. To give you a future and an awesome expectancy of what that future holds. That's who God is. And that's who you are. I don't care what anybody else has said about you. I don't care what anybody else says about you. This is what God says about you. Believe Him, not other people. You always have your detractors. You always have those who are going to put you down, kill your joy, you know, destroy your spirit, destroy your life. They're there. You know they're there. Ignore them because they don't know better than God does. God knows. And God says, these are the plans that I have for you. Is God awesome or what? Amen. Lord bless you all. Amen. Give God a hand.